Hello, biology students. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go over semester 1 information, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to make sure that we have everything ready for finals, right? So first things first, we're going to talk about hypothesis, and we're going to talk about what that means. For your hypothesis, they want the correct format, and for the correct format, you guys should have if, then, and because, right? So if, right, per se, light increases, right, then you would say that more like photosynthesis happens, right? And because, right, so you would state the reason why. So because light is a reactant for photosynthesis. All right, so those are kind of like the deals on there. So the main thing is to have the if, the then, and the because, especially when you're going ahead and when you're writing like your claims and what that means, okay? So next thing is TALK stands for title, axis, label, key, and scale, right? So you guys need to know what that means and use this really as a checklist. Don't forget the title because a lot of people forget the title, okay? So this one I already did in class, but I'll go over it one more time just to kind of review that with you. So my first thing is going to be my title. So I'm going to go the effect of fertilizer growth. And I got that from the title here, fertilizer on plant growth. So I see on there that I'm using this deal as my title, right? Next thing, we have to go ahead and we have to figure out how we're going to organize it. So we have our weeks and then our height. Typically, time goes ahead and goes on the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to write weeks or week. And then right here, we'll write our height. And then we are going to go ahead and we're going to scatter this out. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Perfect. So I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Right? And then for my height, it's a little trickier to scale. So I looked at my first value is 5. My last value is 21. So let's try 5. So if I go by 5s, I can go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. I can do something like that, and you'll see, oh, my scale's not even, guys. Let's try that one more time. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. I can do something like that where I'm counting by 5s all the way up, which is absolutely fine. Another way you can do it is that you guys can go by 2. So what I did is you can go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. But you'll see that if you go by 2s, you end up short. So you really have to figure out that this is 2, 4, 6. You can do that. 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22. That's another way to go ahead and to scale it. So then you have to go ahead and you start graphing some of your points. So when you guys are graphing some of your points, we are going to be going ahead and we're going to be making sure that this is our thing on there. So week 1, I have 5, so my 5 will be there. I have 5 again for week 2, week 3, 6, 4, 7, 7, 9, 10, 12, 12, and 11. So that would be my first line. I go ahead and I connect those, and then I label that on this side as saying it is without fertilizer. So I have my without fertilizer there. And again, if you guys do not have color like on like your task or something, you can always like do like X's or something, and then the X's would be like one thing, and then like squares could be another thing. You can do something like that. Like there's always like different options that you can do. Okay, so next one is going to be the height with fertilizer. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pick a different color, and I'm going to graph that. So again, I start at 5, 2 is at 6, 3 is at 8, 4, 9, 11, 15, 17, 21, 21, 18, 21, 21, 10, 18. Yeah. Okay, so then you would go ahead and you'd make your other line. And again, like if for some reason, like you don't have like colors or something on the test, right, you can make each of the points like a different shape so that you have something on there. And then having those things as like different shapes could be like another way that you distinguish it on there. So then this would be with fertilizer. So that would be like your next thing on there. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to look at this. And we're going to talk about some of this graphs. I feel like I skipped a question. Let me double check. Okay, good. Okay. So when you guys are looking at this, we're talking about the success of hunting groups in dolphin pods. And it says, how does the size of hunting groups affect the success of dolphins? So we go ahead and we look at our size of hunting groups, and you'll see that that is at the bottom. This side is fish caught. And this side is attack success percentage. So there's like two things that they're looking at. So for this one, it says affect the success of dolphins. And if you guys look at this, right, you guys will see that both of these graphs are talking about success. So we look at this graph and we see, okay, we're going to look at the percentage, and we see that 6, 8, 12, like on here are like the highest. So we can say that success percentage is high at 6, 8, and 12. And then we say that fish caught is highest at 10 and 12. Right? So then we can say that between groups of 6 to 12 dolphins are the most successful because they have a higher percentage of fish caught and a percentage of success. So again, you guys are just looking at like the data and being able to go ahead and to figure out what they are talking about, drawing a conclusion. Okay, so the next one I ask you, why do you believe larger hunting groups are less successful? So in this case, they're talking about the 18s, 20, and 22, right? So, first of all, right, we're talking about success percentage, right, and successful hunt, right? So there could be a couple of reasons. Number one, the group is like too big to share. And what we mean by this is you have to remember that when we have in group behavior requires us to share success. So in group behavior, like you have to remember that you're like sharing like everything, like even though like you're closest to stuff, you have to share more. So that can also kind of like impede on that. Okay. This one, they're talking about the graph. This is logistic. And we know that because it is S shaped, right? And it goes ahead and it caps out like right here at the top. So that's how we know that. Carrying capacity is how much the environment can hold. So what we mean by this is that the environment and the ecosystem around us, we can only hold so many organisms. So when we're going ahead and when we're talking about this, we're talking about how many resources we have like available to us. So like if we're in like a big grass meadow and there are like apple trees in the meadow, and then only these animals like per se only eat apples, we're limited by the amount of apple trees. So there'll be a point where there's like certain things that only like eat certain things. Okay, so next thing. It says out of the 5 species in the graph above, which most closely represents exponential growth. So for exponential growth, we're looking for something that's J-shaped. And this one is asking us for closely represents. So we have to go ahead and we have to look at which one has the most J shape. And if you look at this, like this one stands out the most, right? And we look at that and we see that it is species 3, right? So that is going to be your thing on there. Also, if you guys look at this key, what's nice about this key is that they use like different types of dashed lines. And because of their different types of dashed lines, we're able to go ahead and we're able to tell like which line that we're looking at. Okay, it says out of the 5 species in the graph, which is the first to reach its carrying capacity. So we're looking at which one is going to go ahead and which one is going to level out first, right? So let's see. So we have, it's kind of hard to tell right now. So that one is that line. We have this line right here. And we have this line right here, and we have that line right there, right? So we have like those kind of 3 lines that are at the bottom, right? So we're trying to see like which animal I kind of grew and then leveled out. So you could probably argue a few of these, but I would argue species 4, and as long as you're able to back it up by the graph, that's fine. So if you went with like species 4, right, you can say that it doesn't grow like beyond a certain point, right? So that species 4 does not grow beyond maybe 3,000. Oopsies, 3,000. Okay, next one is to go ahead and to define biodiversity. So in other words, biodiversity is having many different species in like one spot. When we're looking at that, if you guys remember with our lab, so what we did was we put some sticky paper outside in different places, and we're trying to find which one is the most biodiverse. So in other words, which one has as many different species as possible. Okay, so next one, it says circle or highlight the organisms on the food web that would store the most energy. So this one is going to be right here, which is our producers, right? And they're asking us why our producers would store the most energy. And the producers, it's because they make their own food, right? They go ahead and they make their own food. And because they make their own food, they have like the most energy. So they grab energy from the sun and they're able to make their own food. And because they make their own food, they're the ones that provide energy for the rest of the ecosystem. All right, so it says using the trophic pyramid to the right, identify which organism can be classified as a producer. I would say this grass thing. Which one is your primary consumer? It's going to be my herbivores, which is my rabbit, grasshopper, all of that stuff. So that would be that. My secondary consumers are my carnivores, which is these guys right here. And then my tertiary consumer is my top predator. Sometimes instead of top predator, you guys will see apex predator, and that's like another way to go ahead and to say that. Okay. So why is a pyramid used to display the transfer of energy between organisms? Right. So we use a pyramid because we go ahead and we see how much energy is being transferred. So the pyramid goes ahead and tells us how much energy we have. Have at each level. So this gives us a hint, right? Because we have the most producers. Then after that, we have the second most amount of herbivores, then the carnivores, and then the top predators. Right? So that's why usually in an ecosystem, you don't have that many top predators. Okay. So next one. It says, describe 2 advantages that zebras have by living in a large group. Number 1, they have protection. So that is very significant, especially if you're like a prey animal, like an animal of prey. That is like a big thing. And then also you go ahead and you share resources. So that is like pretty much like the biggest thing between those things is that we're going ahead and that we're sharing resources. Okay, so next thing, we're going to be talking about cellular respiration. Again, like I told you guys, cellular respiration, photosynthesis, really big part of this test, right? So we have to be able to know what are the ins and outs as well as the equation. Okay, so you guys got to think about what you guys need to survive. So we need glucose, kind of like our food. So glucose is a type of sugar, and then we're going to have oxygen. And then after we have oxygen, we are going to go ahead and we're going to have, we produce water, carbon dioxide, and most importantly, ATP. Right, so you guys should also know the symbols that kind of go along with this. So glucose is C6H12O6. Oxygen is O2, water is H2O, carbon dioxide is CO2, and ATP you'll also see represented as energy. So when you guys are writing this equation, you should have 6O2 plus C6H12O6 makes H2O plus 6 CO2 plus ATP. So that is what your equation should look like. And this organelle, by the way, this is called the mitochondria. And if they ask you where cellular respiration takes place, you guys should be able to say mitochondria. Okay, so next one. This is the chloroplast. Chloroplast. So in the chloroplast, this is where plants go ahead and they make energy for themselves. And you guys will notice right now that these are just kind of really the opposites of each other. So plants take in CO2 or carbon dioxide. They also take in, they also go ahead and they take in some water. And they also take in sunlight. Okay, so these are the things that plants take in. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about what plants produce. So plants produce oxygen, which is O2, right? And then plants also produce, in this case, glucose, which is the whole C6H12O6. 12O6. Okay, so those are your things on there. And if you guys really take a look at this, you guys will see that they're kind of flipped from each other, minus the ATP. So the ATP would be the big difference, and then the sunlight would be like the two main differences. Okay, so again, you guys should be able to go ahead and to kind of write down this equation. So 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus sunlight, or sometimes you'll just see light. Go ahead and make oxygen, which is 6O2 plus C6H12O6. And then another thing to keep in mind is that plants do both reactions. So that is kind of like the thing to know, is that the plants go ahead and to do one of them. Animals only do this. So this is like an animal thing. So this is animals. So animals are only able to go ahead and animals are able to do cellular respiration, right? And plants go ahead and plants do that too, right? This is a plants only thing. Okay, so that's just kind of a couple of things to keep in mind. Okay, so it says the diagram to the right shows spheres of Earth. The arrow shows how carbon moves from one sphere to another. For each letter, identify the method that allows carbon to go ahead and to move from one sphere to another. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually start with 17, and then I'll go back to 16. So your biosphere is pretty much anything that's alive, and you guys will see that this is that picture right there. So this is like living things, right? Your geosphere is like this deal, which is like your rocks, mountains, stuff like that. Like rocks, mountain, lands, that's all geosphere. Hydrosphere is right here, which is water. So any water, so lakes, rivers, streams, oceans, those are all part of that. And then the atmosphere is obviously like the sky. So anything that's up above you in the sky. Okay, so now there's different things that can go ahead and that can happen so that carbon goes ahead and it moves through all of the spheres. So that's why we're going to go ahead and talk about the whole A, B, C, and D sort of deal. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and we're going to start talking about this. So if you guys look at this, so when we go from the biosphere to the geosphere, what we see is that an organism can go ahead and decompose, and it becomes part of the geosphere again. So it's like after organism dies. Right. I can go from, what else? The atmosphere to the hydrosphere. Okay. So next one, I can go from the atmosphere to the biosphere, right? So that is going to be photosynthesis. So what happens is that I take CO2 from air to like plants and stuff, right? And then I can go from the biosphere to the atmosphere because of respiration. So if I'm breathing out, I'm also exhaling carbon dioxide. So you exhale CO2. So some of the things that are on there, I can also go from the geosphere to the atmosphere by combustion. So I'm going ahead and I'm burning fossil fuels. And then I can go from my atmosphere to the hydrosphere with diffusion. So that means that some carbon dioxide gets absorbed by the ocean. So very similar to like how they carbonate soda, you can imagine. They go ahead and they have they add some carbon into it. It's the same thing that happens like over time. So very slowly over time, water will go ahead and will absorb CO2. So that's what they mean by diffusion. Okay. So it says as the CO2 in the atmosphere increases, right, global temperature also increases. So because CO2 goes ahead and traps heat. So that is the thing on there. So traps heat. Okay. It says a student made a model of an ecosystem in a bottle. What organisms are providing the source of oxygen in this ecosystem? So if you guys remember and kind of go up here, right, we'll see that plants, right, go ahead and they put out oxygen. So it will be your plant, right? They're asking us what processes are making oxygen for our ecosystem, and that'll be photosynthesis. What organisms are providing the source of carbon in this ecosystem? So you guys can say the snail and the fish. And then they're going ahead and they're going through respiration. And since they're going through respiration, they go ahead and they provide the carbon dioxide from the system. The student said that plants need us because we give them CO2, and we need plants because they give us oxygen and glucose. Why is this statement incorrect? So plants don't really need us because plants can get CO2 from the atmosphere. From atmosphere, and frankly, the atmosphere / the ocean are like the biggest carbon stores. So they're able to go ahead and get that from there. They're not going to go ahead and they're not going to get it from us like directly. Like in the grand scheme of things, we don't produce that much CO2. Okay. Our relationship to plants, though, is that we rely on plants to go ahead and plants provide oxygen to animals. So that is your thing on that. Okay. So the next thing it says, a student places aquatic plants in front of a lamp at different distances. The closer the light is to the plant, the more intense the light is. All right, so that's important for a little bit. The student records how many oxygen bubbles she sees the plants make in a minute. Her data is to the right, so you guys see that. And then it says make a line graph. Remember, your graph talks. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write for my title, photosynthesis of plants. All right, then I go ahead and I'm going to go distance at the bottom. And then I'm going to write number of oxygen bubbles. And then I'm going to go ahead and get this thing going. So 10, 20, actually I can space it out a little bit more. 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. So I go ahead and have that. And then I see that I have to go up by a lot. All right, so maybe my best course of action is probably to count by 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100. And I go ahead and I do that because if I look at this, right, my 95 is the biggest number. So I'm really aiming for something that's higher than 100. Okay, so getting back into our graph, we are going to go ahead and we're going to graph our data. So at 50 centimeters, I have 5. So you'll see that I'll put that down here. All right, 40 is 12, so a little bit over 10. 30 is 35. Oh my goodness, it's took up this. it thinks I'm doing something else. 30 is 35, so that'll be right there. 20 is 2062. So a little over 60. I don't know why it's doing this to me. And then 10 is going to be 95. So what I would do is I would go ahead and I would use these points to go ahead and to create my line, right? And you guys should all have a line that looks something like that, right? So a line that looks something like that would be fine, okay? And now they're asking us, can you make a claim about how light intensity affects photosynthesis? So you guys can say, as light increases, right? So as light increases, right, you have to see photosynthesis what? So when you guys are looking at this, the reason why I can go ahead and I can talk about photosynthesis is because in photosynthesis, we're producing oxygen, right? So as I'm closer to the light, as it says right there, the light is going to be more intense. So the closer I am to the light, my photosynthesis rate is also going to increase. Right, so that's what they mean by going ahead and creating a claim. It says make a prediction about how many bubbles a plant of 5 centimeters from the light would make. Right, so if I were to go ahead and if I were to extend this line and look at it this way, right, you guys will see that it's over 100. So even if you just write over 100, that's fine. They're not looking for like an exact number. Okay, and then this one, it says 35 centimeters. So if I look in here, right, and I see that, I can estimate that it's about maybe 21, 22. So that would be my answer. Again, it's just rounding. It's nothing crazy. Okay, so the next thing, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about Pangea stuff. Right, so Pangea is when we had all the continents together. And that is kind of like what we're going ahead and what we're looking at is like just like the theory of us having just one big landmass. Okay, and says how is the diagram evidence from Pangea? Right, so if we go ahead and if we look at this, it says distribution of fossils, right, and we see same fossils across all continents. And across all continents. So that is kind of like what you guys see over here, and like even like you have like some of the same like land mammals and the same like plants, and then we know that these things like cannot cross oceans, so they must be all of that. Okay, fossil record. Why is the fossil record incomplete? Right, and so there's a couple of reasons. First and foremost, not everything fossilized. Fossilizes. So you have to think about it. It's fossils are rare, right? So fossils are rare things, and the conditions have to be right. So that is pretty much the main deals on there. Is that like not everything fossilizes? The conditions need to be right. Right. Most things decomposed. We also lose fossils in the rock cycle as well. Like, for example, some like pieces of earth, they go ahead and they're like under in the mantle and all of that. And then by then it gets melted and, you know, it's done for. Okay. So relative dating. So relative dating is basically estimating dates from youngest to oldest. So that is pretty much what they're doing on there. So what you guys will see is that at the top we have our youngest, and at the bottom we'll have our oldest. So we have those two things on there. So they're asking us which layer, and then after they want us to estimate the layer of HE. So I already brought older to youngest. So I'm guessing this is layer E. And then if you guys are looking at that with relative dating, you're just asked to estimate. So it's going to be about 20,000 years. So 24 to 9 million years old. And you see that this, for the estimate, it's like a big range. Okay, so that is like the main thing that we're asking us. Okay, for this one, when we're talking about erosion and weathering. And basically, in this case, we're talking about how wind and water shape rocks. So when we're talking about how wind and water go ahead and they shape rocks, right, we're talking about how water like crashes into the rocks and it goes ahead and kind of like melts it down over time. And like wind, like if you blow over like something a very long period of time, right, the rocks will go ahead and the rocks will break down. Homologous and analogous structures we're not talking about. The next thing, it says using the image below, identify what type of structure is the tailbone in humans. Right, so when you guys are looking at this, right, we have two things, and we talked about this. So this is going to be the vocab of vestigial structure, and it's the vestigial structure because it is leftover, right? So anything left over that has like no use is considered like a vestigial structure. It says the data table on the right was provided comparing whale proteins to those of other organisms. Based on the data, which organism is most closely related to the whale? Right, so we're looking at which one has the most similarities to the whale. So you can look at these numbers right here if you want to, or you can go ahead and you can look at the percentages. So if you guys look at the percentages, we see that, oh, this is a high number, this is a high number, right? And we can go ahead and we can say that the hippo is most related. And that is just because it has that higher percentage. All right, so it says, how does embryology go ahead and support the idea of common ancestry? So embryos, like developing embryos have similar features. So when we go ahead and when we look at that, we see that we have gills on everybody. Everybody has tails, right? And these are all very different animals. So when we're going ahead and when we're looking at that, right, we can go ahead and we can say like, oh, like maybe they had a common ancestor somewhere along the way, which is why as embryos, they all look very similar. Okay, you guys, so thank you for a good semester. This is all semester 1 information that you guys will need for your final. And good luck. And as always, if you have any questions, let me know. Okay.